Ambassador Keth Varan had seen many things in his long life. He had traveled to over 200 worlds. He had met species that breathed fire and species that lived in the cold darkness of space. He had watched empires rise and fall across the galaxy. But nothing in his 300 years of life had prepared him for what he saw aboard the human ship called Endeavor. The humans were getting ready for war. Keth Varan stood near the back of the bridge and watched everything with his 4 eyes. His blue scales shifted color slightly as he observed the crew moving around him. Every human on the bridge had a job to do, and they did it without wasting a single moment. Captain Daniel Murray stood at the center of the bridge. He was a tall man with gray hair at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. Those lines came from years of hard choices and sleepless nights. He spoke quietly to his officers, giving orders in a calm voice that never wavered. Commander Katie Chen stood beside him. She was younger than the captain, with black hair pulled back tight against her head. Her fingers moved across the control panels with speed and skill. She coordinated the movements of 12 human warships like a musician conducting an orchestra. The Galactic Council had sent Keth Varan to observe this mission. He was supposed to watch and report back on human military tactics. The Council believed this would be a short observation. They expected the humans to realize they were outmatched and surrender before any real fighting began. The Dominion of Varketh had invaded 3 human colony worlds 6 weeks ago. In those first terrible days, they had killed over 4 million human civilians. Men, women, and children had been slaughtered without mercy. The Dominion was known throughout the galaxy for its cruelty. They believed that fear was the best weapon, and they used it well. Every other species that had faced the Dominion had eventually surrendered. The Vorix had given up half their territory. The Krell had paid tribute for 2 centuries. Even the mighty Silthari Confederacy, Keth Varan's own people, had chosen negotiation over war when the Dominion threatened their borders. The humans had chosen differently. When news of the massacres reached Earth, the humans did not send diplomats. They did not offer tribute or territory. Instead, they gathered their fleet and declared war against an empire that had never been defeated. The Galactic Council thought the humans were insane. Keth Varan was starting to think they might be right. He walked through the corridors of the Endeavor, watching the preparations. In the armory, soldiers checked their weapons one by one. They loaded ammunition and tested targeting systems. Their faces were serious, but not afraid. In the medical bay, doctors and nurses prepared for the wounded they knew would come. They laid out surgical tools and stocked blood supplies. In the main hangar bay, Lieutenant Ryan Torres addressed the ground forces. He was a young man, perhaps 30 years old, with brown skin and a shaved head. His voice echoed off the metal walls as he spoke to the assembled Marines. There were over 500 soldiers in that hangar. They stood in perfect rows, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Each one carried enough weapons to destroy a small building. They listened to their lieutenant without moving, without speaking. Keth Varan moved closer to hear the briefing. Lieutenant Torres spoke clearly and simply. He told them about the mission. They would assault the Dominion forces occupying the Kepler system. They would free any human prisoners still alive. They would destroy the enemy completely. He did not promise them victory. He did not tell them they would all survive. Instead, he told them the truth. Some of them would die. Perhaps many of them would die. But their deaths would mean something. Their sacrifice would protect the humans, who could not protect themselves. When the lieutenant finished speaking, something strange happened. The soldiers did not cheer. They did not shout battle cries or pound their fists against their chests. Instead, they simply nodded. They accepted what was coming. They had made peace with death long before this moment. Keth Varan felt his scales turn pale. In all his years, he had never seen warriors face death with such calm acceptance. Most species fought because they believed they would survive. They fought with hope in their hearts. These humans fought knowing they might not see another sunrise, and they were at peace with that knowledge. He returned to the bridge just as Captain Murray was receiving a communication from the flagship Resolute. Admiral Nicole Brooks appeared on the main screen. She was an older woman with silver hair and eyes as hard as steel. She had commanded human fleets for over 30 years. She had never lost a battle, but she had also never faced odds like these. The Dominion had 40 warships defending the Kepler system. They had orbital defense platforms and ground-based weapons. They had thousands of soldiers holding the occupied colonies. By any reasonable measure, the human fleet of 12 ships should not even consider an attack. Admiral Brooks gave her final orders. The fleet would jump to the Kepler system in 30 minutes. They would engage the enemy immediately upon arrival. There would be no retreat. There would be no surrender. When the transmission ended, Captain Murray turned and saw Voran watching from the observation area. The captain walked over to the alien ambassador. His footsteps were slow and steady. His face showed no fear, no doubt, no hesitation. "Ambassador," he said, "you should secure yourself in your quarters. The jump will happen soon, and then things will get very dangerous." Voran's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. He had studied the tactical situation carefully. He knew the numbers. "Captain," he said, "the Dominion has 40 warships. Your fleet has 12. The mathematics of this battle are not in your favor." Captain Murray smiled. It was a strange smile, full of something Voran could not identify. It was not hope. It was not confidence. It was something deeper and more dangerous. "We know," the captain said simply. "Then why are you doing this?" Voran asked. "Why throw your lives away against an enemy you cannot defeat?" The captain's smile faded. His eyes grew serious. "Because they killed our people, Ambassador. They murdered our children. They thought we would be afraid. They thought we would kneel." He leaned closer to the alien observer. "Humans do not kneel." Voran had no response to that. He watched as the captain returned to his command chair and began the final preparations for battle. Around him, the human crew worked with quiet efficiency. They knew what was coming, they knew the odds, and still they did not falter. The ambassador made his way to his quarters as the ship began its countdown to the jump. He strapped himself into the safety harness and tried to understand what he had witnessed. These humans were walking into almost certain death, and they did so willingly. The stars around the Kepler system burned cold and distant. Between those stars, 2 fleets faced each other across the darkness of space. The Dominion Armada spread across thousands of kilometers. Their warships arranged in a formation that had crushed dozens of species before. They were confident. They were powerful. They had never known defeat. The human fleet looked tiny in comparison, 12 ships against 40. It should have been a massacre. Voran watched from the observation deck of the Endeavour. His 4 eyes moved constantly, trying to take in everything at once. The main view screen showed the enemy fleet in terrible detail. Each Dominion warship was massive, covered in weapons that could crack planets. Their hulls were painted with symbols of conquest, trophies from every species they had defeated. A transmission came through on all frequencies. The face of Varketh the Conqueror himself appeared on every screen. He was enormous, even by Dominion standards, with thick gray skin and eyes that held nothing but cruelty. He had personally ordered the massacre of the human colonies. He had watched the killing and smiled. "Surrender now, humans," his voice boomed across space. "Surrender, and we will grant you quick deaths. Resist, and we shall make examples of your worlds. We will burn your planets to ash. We will make your children scream for mercy that will never come." The threat hung in the silence of space. Voran waited for the humans to respond. He expected fear. He expected negotiations. He expected the reasonable response of a species facing certain destruction. Instead, Admiral Nicole Brooks appeared on the communication channel. Her silver hair was pulled back and her face showed no emotion at all. When she spoke, her voice was as calm as if she were ordering dinner. Dominion Forces, this is Admiral Brooks of the United Earth Navy. You have committed acts of genocide against our people. You have murdered innocent civilians. You have killed our children. She paused for a moment. When she continued, her voice grew harder. We do not negotiate with those who slaughter innocents. We do not surrender to murderers. Prepare to face judgment. The channel closed. For a moment, nothing happened. The two fleets hung in space, separated by thousands of kilometers of empty void. Then the humans attacked. Keth Voran could not believe what he was seeing. The human ships did not form defensive positions. They did not try to protect themselves while wearing down the enemy. Instead, they surged forward at full speed, driving directly into the heart of the Dominion formation. The Endeavor shook as the first enemy weapons found their target. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Damage reports flooded the bridge. A section of the hull on Deck 7 had been breached. 12 crew members were dead. Captain Murray did not flinch. "Return fire," he ordered. "All batteries, target the lead dreadnought." The Endeavor's weapons answered with fury. Plasma bolts and missiles streaked across space, slamming into the Dominion flagship. The enemy shields flickered under the assault. But there were so many enemy ships, so many weapons firing back. Keth Voran gripped the railing of the observation deck as the ship shook again. He watched the tactical display and saw human ships taking damage everywhere. The destroyer Valiant had lost its main engines. The cruiser Dauntless was venting atmosphere from a dozen breaches. The frigate Storm was burning. And still, the humans pressed forward. Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer led a squadron of fighter craft through the chaos. His small ships dodged between the massive warships, weaving through weapons fire that would have destroyed them instantly if it connected. They were heading for a Dominion dreadnought, one of the largest ships in the enemy fleet. "Palmer, this is Endeavor." Commander Chen's voice came through the radio. "That dreadnought's shields are still at 80%. You cannot breach them with fighters alone." Lieutenant Commander Palmer's response was short and simple. "Watch me." His squadron dove toward the dreadnought's engine section. The massive ship tried to turn its weapons on the small craft, but they were too fast, too nimble. 3 fighters were destroyed in the approach. Their pilots died without a sound, their ships becoming brief flowers of fire in the darkness. Palmer reached the engine section. His weapons were too weak to penetrate the shields, but he was not trying to shoot his way through. Instead, he flew directly into the shield generator housing. His ship hit at full speed. The explosion was enormous. The dreadnought's shields collapsed. A chain reaction ripped through the engine section. Seconds later, the entire ship broke apart in a ball of fire that briefly outshone the nearby star. Lieutenant Commander Palmer's last transmission was a single word: "Gotcha." Keth Voran felt his scales turn white with shock. He had just watched a human deliberately sacrifice himself to destroy an enemy ship. It was not an accident. It was not a desperate last act of a dying pilot. It was a planned attack that required the pilot to know he would die. And it worked. The destruction of the dreadnought threw the Dominion formation into confusion. Human ships poured through the gap, their weapons firing constantly. 2 more Dominion vessels fell before they could reform their lines. On the bridge of the Endeavor, Captain Murray watched the battle unfold. His face was grim but determined. He had known men like Scott Palmer for his entire career. He had watched friends die in battles across a dozen star systems. Each death hurt, each loss left a scar. But the mission continued. It always continued. "Sir," Commander Chen reported, "the Dominion flagship is trying to retreat." Murray's eyes narrowed. "Do not let them escape. All ships, concentrate fire on Varketh's vessel." The human fleet turned like a single creature. Every ship focused its weapons on the Dominion flagship. The massive warship tried to flee, its engines burning at full power. but it was too slow, too damaged from the earlier fighting. The resolute Admiral Brooks' flagship led the final assault. Missiles and plasma bolts hammered the enemy vessel from every direction. Its shields failed, its hull cracked, its weapons fell silent one by one. Varketh the Conqueror sent one final transmission. His face was no longer confident. For the first time in his long life, he looked afraid. "This is impossible," he said. "You are humans. You are weak. You are nothing." Admiral Brooks appeared on the channel. Her expression had not changed. "We are the ones you should have feared," she said simply. The Resolute fired one last barrage. The Dominion flagship broke apart, taking Varketh and his command crew with it into the darkness of death. The remaining Dominion ships scattered. Some tried to surrender. Others fled toward the edge of the system. The human fleet pursued them without mercy. By the end of the first day, 23 Dominion warships had been destroyed. 8 more had been captured. Only 9 managed to escape into hyperspace. The human losses were heavy. 4 ships destroyed completely. Every surviving vessel was damaged. Over 800 crew members were dead. But they had won. Keth Voren stood alone on the observation deck as the battle ended. He watched the wreckage of the Dominion fleet drift through space. He saw the human ships regrouping, already preparing for the next phase of the operation. He had studied warfare for over a century. He had observed hundreds of battles between dozens of species. He thought he understood how wars were fought. He had been wrong. The humans did not fight like any species he had ever seen. They did not try to minimize their losses. They did not retreat when the odds turned against them. They pressed forward with a determination that seemed almost insane. The dropship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of Kepler 7b. Outside the small windows, fire wrapped around the hull like an angry fist. The metal groaned under the pressure of re-entry. Warning lights flashed across every panel. Keth Voren gripped his safety harness with all 4 hands. He had traveled through space for 3 centuries, but he had never experienced anything like this. The dropship was falling toward the planet at incredible speed, surrounded by flames and fury. Around him sat the soldiers of 1st Platoon. They wore heavy combat armor painted in dark colors. Their weapons were secured to their chests. Their faces were hidden behind sealed helmets. They did not speak. They did not move. They simply waited. Sergeant Ben Cooper sat nearest to the alien ambassador. He was a large man with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they could crush stone. His armor showed the marks of many battles, scratches, and dents that told stories of violence and survival. When he spoke, his voice was calm despite the chaos around them. "First time in a combat drop, Ambassador?" Keth Voren managed to nod. The Silthari did not use such aggressive insertion methods. His people preferred careful planning and slow approaches. This felt like madness. Cooper almost smiled. "You get used to it. The shaking stops once we clear the upper atmosphere. Then things get really interesting." As if on cue, the flames outside the windows faded. The dropship leveled out and began its final approach toward the surface. Through the forward window, Keth Voren could see the ruins of New Portland spread across the landscape below. The city had been home to 300,000 humans before the invasion. Now it was a graveyard. Smoke rose from collapsed buildings. Craters marked the locations where Dominion weapons had struck. The streets were empty of living things. 2 minutes to landing zone, the pilot announced. Enemy anti-aircraft fire detected. Brace for evasive action. The dropship banked hard to the left. Bright streaks of energy flashed past the windows as Dominion ground weapons tried to shoot them down. Another dropship, flying 50 meters to their right, was not so lucky. A direct hit tore through its hull. The craft exploded in a ball of fire, killing everyone aboard instantly. Keth Voren watched the debris fall toward the ruined city. 30 human soldiers had just died in a single moment. The Marines around him did not react. They had seen this before. They knew it could happen to them at any second. The dropship hit the ground hard. The rear ramp slammed down before the craft had even stopped moving. Sergeant Cooper was the first one out, his weapon raised and ready. "Move, move, move!" he shouted. "Get to cover! Enemy positions north and west." The Marines poured out of the dropship like water from a broken dam. They spread across the landing zone, taking positions behind rubble and wrecked vehicles. Weapons fire began immediately. The sharp crack of human rifles mixed with the deep boom of Dominion plasma weapons. Kethavorin followed the soldiers, his 4 legs carrying him quickly across the broken ground. A young Marine grabbed his arm and pulled him behind a collapsed wall. "Stay down, Ambassador," she said. "Things are about to get loud." Her name was Amy Russell. She was perhaps 25 years old, with red hair cut short and freckles across her nose. Her eyes were green and hard. She held her rifle like it was part of her body, moving with practiced ease. The battle for New Portland's administrative center began. The Dominion had fortified the large building at the center of the city. They had placed heavy weapons on every floor and surrounded the structure with barriers and traps. Over 500 enemy soldiers defended the position. They believed it was unbreakable. Sergeant Cooper split his platoon into 3 groups. Alpha Team would assault the front entrance. Bravo Team would circle around to the rear. Charlie Team would provide covering fire and handle any reinforcements. Kethavorin stayed with Charlie Team, watching from a position that gave him a view of the entire battlefield. What he saw would stay with him for the rest of his life. Alpha Team advanced through the streets toward the front entrance. They moved from cover to cover, always under fire. 2 soldiers fell in the first 30 seconds. Their bodies lay where they dropped as their comrades pushed forward. Corporal Tyler Morrison took a plasma bolt through his left shoulder. The impact spun him around and dropped him to the ground. Kethavorin expected him to stay down, to wait for medical help, to retreat. Instead, Morrison rolled onto his stomach and continued firing with his right arm. Blood poured from his wound, staining his armor dark red. He killed 3 Dominion soldiers before a medic finally reached him and dragged him to cover. Amy Russell noticed Kethavorin watching. "Tyler will be fine," she said. "The armor sealed the wound. He will lose the arm, probably, but he will live." She said it casually, as if losing a limb was a minor inconvenience. Then she raised her weapon and put 3 rounds through an enemy soldier who had tried to flank their position. Bravo Team reached the rear of the building. They found the back door sealed and reinforced. Rather than wait for explosives, one of the Marines simply charged the door at full speed. His armored body hit the metal with enough force to buckle the frame. He crashed through into the building, firing before he even hit the ground. Kethavorin could hear the fighting inside through his communication link. Gunfire, explosions, screaming. The sounds of close combat, where every second meant life or death. Alpha Team breached the front entrance moments later. The battle moved inside the administrative center, floor by floor, room by room. The Dominion defenders fought hard. They knew what humans did to those who killed their children. Sergeant Cooper led his squad up the main stairwell. Enemy fire poured down from above. One of his soldiers took a hit and tumbled backward, dead before she reached the bottom. Cooper did not pause. He threw a grenade up the stairs and followed it into the explosion. The fighting lasted for 3 hours. When it was finally over, every Dominion soldier in the building was dead. The humans had lost 12 of their own, with another 30 wounded badly enough to require evacuation. Kethavorin walked through the aftermath. The floors were slick with blood, both red and the purple color of Dominion bodies. Bullet holes covered every wall. The smell of smoke and death filled the air. In one of the upper floors, he found something that made him stop. It was a room filled with human bodies, civilians, men, women, children. They had been executed by the Dominion, lined up against the wall and shot. Some of them had been dead for weeks. Others looked more recent. Sergeant Cooper stood in the doorway, looking at the scene. His face was hidden behind his helmet, but his body told Kethovoran everything he needed to know. His hands were clenched into fists. His shoulders were tight with rage. "This is why we fight, Ambassador," Cooper said quietly. "This is what they do to our people. This is what we will never forgive." He turned and walked away, already issuing orders for the next objective. There were more Dominion positions to assault, more enemies to kill. The day was not over yet. Kethovoran stood alone in that room of death. He looked at the faces of the murdered humans. He saw fathers who had tried to protect their families, mothers who had held their children close, young people who had never had a chance to grow old. And he understood. The humans did not fight for glory or conquest. They did not fight for territory or resources. They fought because they had to. They fought because the alternative was unacceptable. They fought because surrender meant allowing this to happen again. Private Russell appeared beside him. "We should go, Ambassador," she said. "More dropships are landing. The second wave is starting." Kethovoran followed her out of the building and back into the ruined S. The battle for the Kepler system ended on the fourth day. The last Dominion soldiers surrendered at dawn, throwing down their weapons and begging for mercy. They had seen what happened to those who continued to resist. They had watched their comrades die one by one. Their will to fight had finally broken. The humans accepted their surrender. There were no executions, no torture, no revenge killings. The prisoners were treated according to human military law, given food and medical care and protection from harm. This surprised Kethovoran more than anything else he had witnessed. He sat in the officers' mess aboard the Endeavour, nursing a glass of human whiskey. The drink burned his throat, but he had grown to appreciate its warmth. Outside the windows, repair drones swarmed over the damaged hull of the ship. The Endeavour had taken over 200 hits during the battle. 1/4 of its crew was dead or wounded, but the ship still flew. Captain Daniel Murray sat across from him. The captain looked tired. Deep shadows hung under his eyes, and his movements were slow and careful. He had not slept more than a few hours in the past 4 days. None of the officers had. Dr. Lauren Mitchell joined them a few minutes later. She was the ship's chief science officer, a woman of about 50 with silver-streaked brown hair and intelligent eyes. She had spent the battle coordinating damage control teams and treating wounded crew members. Her hands still showed traces of blood that would not wash away. "You have questions, Ambassador," she said. It was not a guess. She had been watching Kethovoran throughout the campaign, studying him as he studied the humans. Kethovoran set down his glass. "I have many questions, but the one that troubles me most is simple. Why? Why do you fight this way? Why do you accept such terrible losses? Any other species would have surrendered long before reaching this point." Captain Murray and Dr. Mitchell exchanged a look that Kethovoran could not interpret. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind that comes from years of working together. "Let me ask you something first," Dr. Mitchell said. "How much do you know about Earth and human history?" Kethovoran considered the question. "I know your species achieved spaceflight approximately 300 years ago. I know you unified your planet after a period of internal conflict. I know you have expanded to colonize over 40 worlds. Beyond that, very little. The Galactic Council does not consider human history particularly important." Dr. Mitchell smiled sadly. "That is where the Council makes its mistake. They see 300 years of spaceflight and assume that is all we are. They do not understand what came before." She activated a holographic display in the center of the table. Images appeared, scenes from human history that Kethovoran had never seen. "Our species is approximately 200,000 years old," Dr. Mitchell explained. "For most of that time, we have been at war, not with other species, with our own planet, with ourselves." The images showed humans struggling against nature. Ice covered the land, fires swept across forests, floods destroyed villages, disease killed millions. We survived ice ages that lasted thousands of years. We survived volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. We survived plagues that killed half our population. Again and again we faced extinction. And again we refused to die. The images changed. Now they showed human conflict. Wars fought with spears and swords. Wars fought with guns and cannons. Wars fought with bombs that could destroy entire cities. We also fought each other. Constantly, brutally. We killed millions of our own kind in conflicts over land, resources, beliefs. It was terrible. It was wasteful. It was tragic. Kethavoran watched the images with growing horror. He had known humans were a violent species, but he had not understood the scale. "How did you survive?" he asked. "How did you not destroy yourselves completely?" Captain Murray spoke for the first time. "Because some of us always refused to give up. No matter how bad things got, there were always humans who kept fighting for something better. They built when others destroyed. They healed when others wounded. They hoped when others despaired." He leaned forward, his tired eyes meeting Kethavoran's four. "Every generation of humans has known struggle. Every generation has buried its dead and found the strength to carry on. This is not a weakness, Ambassador. This is our greatest strength. We have been forged through fire for 200,000 years. We have survived everything that nature and our own worst impulses could throw at us." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "The galaxy looks at humans and sees a young species just finding its way among the stars. They think we are soft because we value art and music and love. They think we are weak because we show compassion to our enemies." She gestured at the images still floating above the table. "They do not understand that these things exist because of what we have endured. We create beauty because we have seen so much ugliness. We show mercy because we have known so much cruelty. We love fiercely because we know how easily love can be lost." The images faded. Kethavoran sat in silence for a long moment, processing what he had heard. "The Dominion thought they could break you with genocide," he said slowly. "They thought killing your colonists would make you afraid." Captain Murray's expression grew hard. Instead, they reminded us of what we are. They awakened something that has been part of our species since before we left the caves. We remember what it means to fight for survival. We remember what it means to face impossible odds and refuse to surrender. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned against the blackness of space. "My great-grandfather fought in a war on Earth," he said. "He was 17 years old when his country was invaded. He watched his family die. He watched his city burn. He had every reason to give up. Instead, he picked up a rifle and fought for 5 years until his country was free again." He turned back to face Kethavoran. "That determination is not something we learn. It is something we are. It is written into our genes, Ambassador. Every human alive today is descended from survivors, from people who faced death and refused to kneel. When the Dominion killed our colonists, they did not create fear. They reminded us who we are." Dr. Mitchell spoke again. "The galaxy sees our compassion and assumes we are weak. But compassion is not weakness. It takes strength to show mercy. It takes courage to love in a universe that so often rewards cruelty." She met Kethavoran's eyes directly. "We fight so fiercely because we love so deeply. We sacrifice ourselves because we know that some things are worth dying for. Not glory or conquest or power, but the chance for our children to live in peace. The hope that future generations might never know the horrors we have faced." Kethavoran thought about everything he had witnessed. The soldiers who charged into certain death without hesitation, the pilot who sacrificed himself to destroy an enemy ship, the wounded Marine who kept fighting with one arm. None of them had fought for personal glory. None of them had expected to survive. They had fought because they believed in something larger than themselves. The Galactic Council will not understand this, he said finally. They will see your victory and credit it to luck or Dominion mistakes. They will not accept that humanity is fundamentally different from other species. Captain Murray nodded. We know. We do not need their understanding. We do not need their approval. We only need them to remember one thing. What is that? Do not threaten our people. Do not harm our children. Because if you do, you will face the full weight of 200,000 years of human survival. You will face a species that has clawed its way through extinction events and world wars and every horror imaginable. He smiled grimly. And you will lose. The conversation ended there. Keth Voren returned to his quarters to begin writing his report for the Galactic Council. He wrote about tactics and weapons and logistics. But underneath all the military analysis, he tried to convey so. The war against the Dominion lasted 8 months. In that time, the human fleet pushed deep into enemy territory, liberating occupied worlds and destroying military installations. Every battle cost lives, every victory came with a price paid in blood, but the humans never wavered. They never retreated. They never considered surrender. When the end finally came, it came quickly. The Dominion's economy collapsed under the strain of total war. Their military was shattered, spread thin across too many fronts. Their allies abandoned them one by one, unwilling to die for a losing cause. The surrender ceremony took place on the Dominion homeworld, in the great hall where countless species had knelt before the conquerors. Now it was the conquerors who knelt. Keth Voren stood beside Admiral Nicole Brooks at the signing table. He had requested permission to witness the final moment of the war. After everything he had seen, he needed to see how it ended. The new Dominion leader was a young general named Korth Vale. He was the 7th commander to hold the position in 8 months. The previous 6 had all died in battle against the humans. Korth Vale had survived only because he had been wise enough to sue for peace before his entire species was destroyed. He approached the signing table with his head bowed. His once proud uniform was dirty and torn. His eyes held the look of someone who had watched everything he believed in crumble to dust. Admiral Brooks watched him approach without expression. Her silver hair was still pulled back tight. Her uniform was spotless. She looked exactly as she had 8 months ago when she had first declared war on the Dominion. The only difference was a new medal on her chest, awarded for the victory at Kepler. "The terms of surrender," she said calmly. "You have read them." "I have," Korth Vale replied. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you accept them?" "I accept." The terms were harsh but fair. The Dominion would pay reparations to the families of every human killed in the invasion. They would hand over all officers who had participated in the genocide for war crimes trials. They would disarm their military completely, retaining only defensive forces for internal security. It was the most complete defeat any galactic power had suffered in recorded history. Korth Vale signed the documents with trembling hands. When he finished, he looked up at Admiral Brooks with something like desperation in his eyes. "How did this happen?" he asked. "We were the greatest military power in the galaxy. We had never been defeated. How did humans, a species we dismissed as insignificant, destroy everything we built?" Admiral Brooks considered the question for a long moment. Then she spoke. "You made a mistake that many have made before you. You saw our kindness and called it weakness. You saw our compassion and called it softness. You thought that because we value peace, we do not know how to wage war." She leaned forward slightly. "You were wrong. We value peace because we understand the cost of war better than anyone. We have been fighting for our survival since before your species existed. We have learned lessons written in the blood of billions. And the most important lesson is this: some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost." She straightened again. "You killed our people. You murdered our children. You thought this would make us afraid. Instead, you reminded us what we are capable of when everything we love is threatened." Kortheval had no response. He simply stood there, broken and defeated, as guards led him away to face judgment for his crimes. The ceremony ended. The delegates began to file out of the Great Hall. Human soldiers took up positions throughout the building, ensuring order in the conquered capital. Somewhere outside, the people of the Dominion homeworld watched their new reality unfold. Admiral Brooks turned to Kethvorin. "Ambassador, I understand you have prepared a report for the Galactic Council." Kethvorin nodded slowly. "Yes, Admiral. I have spent the past 8 months documenting everything I witnessed, the tactics, the technology, the logistics. But more importantly, I have tried to explain what I learned about humanity." "And what did you tell them?" The Silthari ambassador paused. He thought about the battles he had seen, the soldiers who had died without hesitation, the determination that burned in human eyes even in the darkest moments. "I told them the truth, Admiral. I told them that humanity is not a young species stumbling through the galaxy. Humanity is an ancient warrior culture that has been tempering itself through endless conflict since before most of our civilizations were born." He turned to face her fully, his 4 eyes reflecting the lights of the conquered capital. "I told them that the galaxy has spent centuries dismissing humans as soft, emotional creatures unsuited for interstellar warfare. I told them that this belief is the most dangerous mistake any species could make." Admiral Brooks raised an eyebrow. "And how did the Council receive this assessment?" Kethvorin made a sound that might have been a laugh in his species. "They did not believe me, Admiral. They cannot understand what I witnessed. They look at your art and your music and your diplomacy. They see your compassion for your enemies and your grief for your fallen. They assume these are signs of weakness." He gestured toward the departing Dominion delegation. "But I have seen the truth. I have watched humans march into battle, knowing they would die and refusing to turn back. I have seen your soldiers weep for their fallen friends and then rise to fight again the next morning. I have witnessed the legacy written in your stars." Ambassador Kethvorin straightened, his scales settling into patterns of deep respect. The galaxy believes it understands humanity. It does not. And when the next threat appears, when the next empire decides that your species is easy prey, they will learn what the Dominion learned. He began walking toward his shuttle. At the ramp, he paused and turned back. Humans do not fight because they love war. They fight because they refuse to let those they love become victims. They fight because surrender is simply not in their nature, and that, Admiral, is the most terrifying thing in the galaxy. Admiral Brooks watched the alien ambassador climb into his shuttle and depart. Around her, human soldiers continued their work. They secured the capital. They processed prisoners. They began the long work of rebuilding what the war had destroyed. In the crowd of soldiers, she saw familiar faces. Sergeant Ben Cooper, now missing his left hand but still leading his squad. Private Amy Russell, promoted 3 times during the war for valor in combat. Corporal Tyler Morrison, still alive despite losing his arm in the first battle. They were tired. They were wounded. They had lost friends and comrades, but they were still standing, still fighting, still refusing to give up. A young lieutenant approached the Admiral. "Ma'am, we have received a transmission from Earth Command. The victory celebrations have begun. They want to know when you will return for the ceremony." Admiral Brooks looked around the Great Hall one last time. So much death had led to this moment. So many sacrifices. So much pain. "Tell them I will return when the job is done," she said. "We still have work to do here." The lieutenant saluted and hurried away. Admiral Brooks walked out of the hall and into the alien sunlight. The Dominion homeworld was strange and unfamiliar. The air smelled wrong. The colors were different from Earth, but the stars above were the same stars that had watched over humanity since the beginning. The same stars that had witnessed every triumph and every tragedy in human history. The same stars that would watch over them for millions of years to come. The stellar legacy continued. Somewhere in the galaxy, other empires watched and waited. Some of them had already begun to reconsider their opinions about humanity. Others remained blind to the truth, convinced that the Dominion's defeat was a fluke, an accident, a mistake that could never happen to them. They were wrong, and someday they would learn. But that was a war for another day. For now, the humans had won. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. They had proven once again that the human spirit could not be broken by any force in the universe. Admiral Brooks looked up at the stars and smiled. "We are still here," she said quietly. "After everything, we are still here, and they always would be." That was the human way. That was the stellar legacy, and the galaxy would never forget it. He tried to explain what he had learned about the human heart. He did not know if the council would listen. He suspected they would dismiss his warnings as exaggeration. They would continue to see humans as a young species, inexperienced and easily intimidated. They would be wrong. And someday, another empire would make the same mistake the Dominion had made. They would threaten human worlds. They would kill human civilians. And they would learn what Keth Voran had learned. Humanity was not a new species finding its place in the galaxy. Humanity was an ancient warrior culture tempered by millennia of conflict. Their compassion was not weakness. Their determination was not foolishness. It was their legacy, written in the stars, written in blood. And the galaxy would never be the same. Treats. Around him, human soldiers continued their work. They cleared buildings. They treated their wounded. They counted their dead. And they kept fighting. The battle for New Portland would continue through the night and into the next day. The humans would lose many more soldiers before it was over. But they would not stop. They would not retreat. They would not surrender. Keth Voran was beginning to understand what made humanity so dangerous. It was not their weapons or their technology. It was not their numbers or their tactics. It was their refusal to accept defeat. It was their willingness to pay any price for victory. It was the fire that burned in their hearts, a fire that no enemy could ever extinguish. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake by awakening that fire. And they won. Against impossible odds, against an enemy that had never been defeated, they won. The ground assault would begin in 6 hours. Keth Voran had requested permission to accompany the Marines to the surface. He needed to understand these humans. He needed to see what drove them to fight this way. Captain Murray had granted his request with a warning. "You will see things down there that will change you, Ambassador. The ground war is not like space combat. It is personal. It is brutal. Are you certain you want to witness it?" Keth Voran had said yes. Now, watching the distant planet grow larger through the observation window, he wondered if he had made a mistake. But it was too late to turn back now. The dropships were loading. The Marines were ready. The war was not over yet. What kind of species produced warriors like this? What terrible history had forged these people into weapons that did not fear their own destruction? Keth Voran did not know the answers yet. But as the Endeavor jumped into hyperspace and raced toward battle, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake by underestimating humanity. The jump lasted only seconds. When the human fleet emerged into normal space, the Dominion Armada was waiting for them. 40 warships filled the view screen, their weapons already charging. The battle for Kepler had begun.